Welcome to Old Worlds for Sleep, a place where history drifts into dreams. Tonight, we take you back to Victorian London, a city of smoke, gaslight, and endless struggle. But instead of kings or queens, we follow the daily journey of ordinary people, where every penny, every loaf of bread, and every meal was a battle between hunger and survival. From steaming street-side pea soup to the humble triumph of a Sunday sheep's head feast, you'll step into the kitchens, markets, and alleys of the 19th century. Here, food wasn't just nourishment, it was culture, community, and sometimes even comedy. So close your eyes, relax, and let us carry you into the forgotten rhythms of Victorian life. This is Old Worlds for Sleep, where the past becomes your lullaby. You wake before the sun does. The first sensation isn't sight or sound, but hunger. That familiar hollow ache presses against your ribs before your eyes even open. You blink at the dim light creeping through a grimy window, the weak dawn of Victorian London around 1850. The glass is streaked with soot, letting in little warmth and less clarity. The room smells of coal smoke, damp wool, and something less pleasant from the chamber pot in the corner that needs emptying. You lie on a straw mattress stuffed into a cotton sack. Scratchy stalks poke through, and there are tiny unwelcome visitors that occasionally bite. It is not comfort, but it is what you call a bed. You shiver under your thin blanket. The small fire that burned last night has long gone cold. Coal costs money, and money is a luxury. Your breath shows in little clouds as you sit up. The boards under your feet groan as if sharing in your complaint about the chill. A voice cuts through the walls, rough and sharp from years of shouting, "Hot eels! Penny a bowl. Hot eels." London street vendors are already awake, advertising food to those who can afford it. The sound makes your stomach twist tighter. If you are fortunate today, breakfast will be bread. Not the soft, fluffy loaves modern ears imagine. Victorian bread is dense, heavy, and often adulterated with chalk or alum to make it look whiter than it is. For most of the working class, it is the main source of calories. Your mother has likely saved half a loaf from yesterday, half for this morning, half for tonight. You make your way down narrow stairs, each step creaking. The kitchen is little more than a hearth with a pot hanging above it. The air is damp, cold, and filled with the faint smell of weak tea. Not fresh tea leaves, but leaves reused again and again until they release almost no flavor. The rich toss their leaves after one brew. The poor stretch them until only hot water remains. Tea's brewing, your mother says, her voice tired, her hands already stirring the pot. She nods toward the loaf on the table. You tear off your share. It's hard, the crust stiff, but food nonetheless. You dip it into the watery tea, softening it before chewing. That's breakfast. The hunger eases but doesn't vanish. It never truly does. Bread fills the belly, but only for a while. You know you'll be hungry again before long. As you eat, you think about what lies ahead. Perhaps work at the docks if the foreman needs extra hands. Perhaps odd jobs on the street. The truth is, much of your day will revolve around the same question it always does: how to get enough food to last until tomorrow. Victorian England is a place of contradictions. Queen Victoria rules over the largest empire the world has ever seen, an empire that spans continents and brings exotic foods to aristocratic tables. Pineapples from the Caribbean, oranges from Spain, beef from Argentina, tea from India. Yet in this cramped London tenement, where smoke and soot cling to everything, food is survival, not luxury. By the 1840s, they called this decade the Hungry Forties. Widespread food shortages and soaring prices meant working families like yours often went without. The rich dined on roast beef and puddings. You counted every crumb. Your mother wraps a small bundle for your midday meal. Another piece of bread, maybe with a thin scraping of dripping, the fat skimmed from yesterday's cooking. She ties the cloth carefully. Don't eat it all at once, she warns. She knows hunger makes a person impatient, but she also knows stretching a little food is the only way to survive. Outside, London is already alive. Horses clop over cobblestones, carriage wheels rattle, factory whistles scream in the distance. The smell is overwhelming: sewage, coal smoke, and roasted chestnuts from a vendor's brazier. The city is noisy, dirty, alive, and hungry. Your stomach growls again as you pass a street vendor. Steam rises from his can. "Penny a bowl, hot eels," he calls. The broth smells rich with herbs. For many, this is comfort food. For you, it is temptation. But the single penny in your pocket must be saved. Maybe for tomorrow's bread. maybe for rent. Hunger teaches caution. Around you, London divides itself in invisible lines. In wealthy homes, kitchen maids are preparing lavish breakfasts: eggs, bacon, buttered toast, imported jams. In middle-class parlors, clerks and shopkeepers eat porridge or cold meats. And here on the street, the poor make do with whatever fills the stomach longest. You keep walking. Hunger is not an event but a condition. The growl in your belly, the weakness in your limbs, the way you glance longingly at every food stall. This is Victorian life for the working poor. Not starvation to death, but starvation as daily companion. As morning brightens, the vendors grow louder. Potatoes roast in their jackets, steam hissing as they're split open. Gingerbread squares wait on trays, their spicy sweetness rare for most. Pickled whelks glisten in jars, pungent and cheap. The smells mix together, a cruel parade for an empty stomach. You clutch the bundle in your pocket. Bread wrapped in cloth, your lifeline for later. It is not much, but it is something. Survival for now. And so begins another day in Victorian London, where hunger wakes you, bread sustains you, and hope, fragile as it is, keeps you moving forward. The smell of damp coal clings to your clothes as you settle into the small wooden chair at the table. In front of you sits the loaf. It is nothing more than dense, coarse bread, your family's daily anchor against starvation. There's no butter, no jam, no soft texture. Instead, the loaf is heavy, stale at the edges, and laced with a faint suspicion of adulteration. Adulterated bread is something every poor Victorian knows too well. Unscrupulous bakers stretch flour with chalk, alum, or even ground-up bones, making loaves appear wider and heavier. The wealthy can choose better, but the poor take what they can get. To complain is useless. The bread fills you, and that is enough. You break off your portion, careful not to take too much. Your mother watches silently, measuring each bite against what must last until evening. The crust is hard, but dipping it into weak tea softens it. The tea itself has no strength left. Tea leaves boiled and reused until the water is more memory than flavor. Still, it is hot, and in a cold London morning that counts for something. Across the narrow table, your younger sibling chews slowly, eyelids heavy from a restless night. Hunger gnawed at him even as he tried to sleep. For children in Victorian London, food is both a need and a constant worry. Malnourishment stunts growth, weakens bones, and leaves them vulnerable to illness. Yet for now he eats quietly, grateful for what little there is. Breakfast in your household is a ritual of restraint. Each movement carries calculation. Half the loaf for morning, half for evening. The tea leaves saved to be boiled again later. The dripping from last week carefully stored in a jar, to be scraped onto bread when the hunger becomes unbearable. Your mother breaks the silence. Eat slowly. Let it last. She knows the trick isn't only physical, it's psychological. To chew slowly, to sip tea between bites, is to convince the body that it is full. You nod, taking smaller bites even as your stomach begs for more. Through the thin wall, you hear neighbors stirring. The cries of babies, the coughs of men preparing for factory shifts, the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. Life in a London tenement is communal whether you want it or not. Families share walls, air, and sometimes even beds. Hot bunking, they call it. One person leaves for the night shift, another takes their place on the still warm mattress. The air grows colder as the weak fire dies out. You glance at the hearth, wishing there were more coal. But coal is expensive, and even if your family had money, the priority would be food. Heat comes second. Hunger takes precedence. Your portion finished, you lick the last crumbs from your fingers. It isn't enough, but it's all you'll get. You think about what others might be eating right now. In wealthier homes, eggs and bacon sizzle in pans, toast is spread with butter and marmalade. In middle-class houses, porridge simmers thick with milk. The contrast feels cruel, but it is reality. Your mother ties up the remaining bread and sets it aside. For tonight, she says firmly, no one dares sneak another bite. To do so would risk tomorrow's meal. Discipline is survival. She pours the last of the tea into mugs. It is little more than colored water, yet the warmth spreads through your hands as you cradle the cup. You sip, closing your eyes, pretending you can taste the bitterness of real leaves. Pretending it is stronger than it is. Breakfast over, your mother prepares the midday bundle. Another piece of bread wrapped in cloth, maybe with a thin layer of dripping if she has managed to save some. She presses it into your hands as though it were treasure. Make it last, she repeats, her eyes steady. You tuck it carefully into your pocket. That small parcel represents the difference between making it through the day or not. It isn't indulgence, it's insurance. As you rise to leave, the sounds of London filter through the window. Vendors shouting, carriage wheels on cobblestones, the distant rumble of factory whistles. The city is awake, alive, and hungry. You pull on your worn coat, the fabric thin against the chill, and prepare to step into the streets where food is both everywhere and nowhere, visible in abundance but out of reach for those without coins. Your mother gives one last instruction as you reach for the door. Remember, don't spend your penny unless you must. You nod. A single coin is a fragile shield against hunger, and you'll need it for when the hollow ache becomes unbearable. The door creaks shut behind you. The world outside is gray, damp, and noisy. The smell of roasting chestnuts drifts on the wind. A horse clops past, its driver shouting at a vendor to move aside. And once again you join the endless march of London's poor, searching for work, food, and survival in a city where bread and weak tea are both breakfast and metaphor, barely enough to sustain, yet everything you have. The moment you step outside, London greets you with its full force. The air is thick with smoke, dampness, and the sharp tang of manure from the endless parade of horses. The streets are alive now, a chorus of voices rising into the gray sky. Hot eels. Penny a bowl. The woman's voice rings out again, cutting through the din. Steam pours from her large metal canister strapped to a cart. The smell of herbs and broth drifts on the wind. Your stomach twists painfully at the thought of warm food. She isn't alone. All along the street, vendors call out their wares in rough, practiced voices. Their cries overlap, creating a strange rhythm, half market, half chaos. A man selling roasted chestnuts rattles his pan, the rich nutty scent mingling with coal smoke. Another has a tray of baked potatoes, their skins cracked open, releasing puffs of steam. They are called jacket potatoes, simple but filling, if you have a penny. Children dart between the stalls, their hands quick, eyes sharp. Some are errand runners for families. Others are street urchins hoping to snatch a bit of food when no one's looking. Everyone is hungry, and hunger breeds creativity. You pause at a stall where a man is selling whelks, pickled sea snails piled into bowls. Their sharp vinegar tang stings your nose. A few steps further, another vendor offers sheep's trotters. He waves a boiled foot of mutton high in the air like a trophy, shouting about how the meat falls right off the bone. For some, this is dinner. For others, it is a reminder of how far they are from the banquets of the rich. The variety is surprising, if not appetizing by modern standards. Jellied eels cool on a tray, their translucent jelly wobbling as the vendor serves a customer. Baskets of mussels and cockles glisten in the weak light, waiting for someone with a half-penny to spare. Nearby, a woman holds out gingerbread squares, dark and spicy, their scent cutting through the fishy air. This is Victorian fast food. Cheap, portable, and meant for workers with little time or means to cook. For the poor, it is easier to buy a meal from a vendor than to prepare one in cramped, coal-dusted lodgings without a proper stove. Food in the streets becomes both necessity and temptation. Your stomach growls again as you watch a man bite into a steaming potato. He splits it open with his hands, salt crystals sprinkling from a paper cone. The smell is almost unbearable in your hunger, but you clutch your penny tightly. Spend it now, and tonight will be nothing but weak tea and regret. You keep walking, observing. The vendors are skilled performers. They know how to shout just loud enough to cut through the crowd. They know when to wave their goods high, when to lower prices as the day drags on. They survive by turning hunger into business. Further down the street, a commotion erupts. A boy, no older than 10, has grabbed a crust of bread from a stall and is running, weaving between adults. The vendor curses loudly, shaking his fist. A few chase half-heartedly, but most people just watch. Theft is common. Hunger drives it, and pity tempers punishment. For some, a stolen crust is the difference between fainting and making it through the day. You know better than to try. One caught thief might mean a beating, or worse. So you tighten your grip on your bundle of bread in your pocket, protective of what little you have. The cries of the vendors follow you as you walk. Hot potatoes, penny each. Fresh cockles, penny a scoop. Gingerbread, cheap gingerbread. Each voice is a reminder that food is all around, yet not truly yours. Abundance and scarcity exist side by side in Victorian London, and for the poor, temptation is constant. You pause near a man with a cart full of pies. The crusts are thin, browned unevenly. The The smell of onion and meat drifts upward. You ask without real hope, "What's in them?" "Mutton," he replies with a grin. But you know better than to believe. Mutton is often a cover word. The meat might be horse, dog, or whatever scraps the butcher couldn't sell. Still, hunger makes you wonder what it tastes like, hot, greasy, and wrapped in pastry. But again you walk on. The penny must be saved. The day has just begun, and already the street has shown you every kind of temptation. You turn down a narrower lane where the vendors thin out. Behind you, their voices still echo, calling out to anyone who will listen. Hot eels. Penny a bowl. Hot potatoes. London street food culture is a lifeline for some, a torment for others. For you, this morning, it is a reminder. Hunger is not only in the stomach but in the air you breathe, the sounds you hear, the sights you cannot afford to touch. You take a deep breath, ignoring the growl in your belly. It's only the beginning of the day, and the struggle for food is just beginning. The street widens as you move closer to the heart of the market district. The noise is overwhelming now, a constant roar of shouting vendors, haggling customers, and clattering carts. London's markets are the lungs of the city, pumping food into every corner, though not always evenly. The smells arrive in waves: sharp vinegar from pickle barrels, the earthy sweetness of turnips piled high on carts, the iron tang of raw meat hanging from butcher hooks. Horses shuffle restlessly, their hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones. Everywhere you look, there is movement. Women balancing baskets, boys carrying trays of goods on their heads, porters pushing heavy barrows. A butcher calls out, his voice cutting across the din, "Best beef. Prime mutton. Fresh this morning." The cuts on display gleam red, marbled with fat, but you know they're far beyond your reach. Wealthier customers cluster near him, purses in hand, selecting joints of meat that will be roasted, basted, and carved later tonight. At another stall, the display is humbler. Trays of offal, the parts the wealthy disdain. Kidneys, livers, and tripe are stacked in heaps. They may look unappealing, but you know these are within the realm of possibility for families like yours. With careful cooking, they can be made tender, seasoned enough to mask their bitterness. Survival hides in these less glamorous offerings. You drift past the fishmongers. Silver-scaled herrings glisten under thin sheets of melting ice. Haddock, cod, and sprats are stacked side by side. The cheaper fish, like sprats, end up in the hands of the poor, often fried in dripping and sold in paper twists on the street. Wealthier households, meanwhile, send their servants for salmon or trout, delicacies for tables you will never see. The cries of the vendors overlap, forming a kind of rough music. Fresh cabbage, penny a head. Sweet apples, 2 for a penny. Cod straight from the coast. Hot pies, steaming hot pies. You weave through the crowd, keeping your hand tight on the bundle in your pocket. One bump, one snatch, and you'd lose your midday meal. Hunger sharpens suspicion. Every glance feels like it could be a thief's. Children dart between legs, some helping mothers, others on errands for boarding houses or shops. Some aren't running errands at all, they are running scams, small hands quick to lift a coin or steal a crust. The market is not only about food, it is about survival, and everyone is playing their part. At the edge of the square, a wealthy woman steps from her carriage, her skirts held carefully above the muck. Her servant rushes forward to clear a path. Heads turn, not at her beauty but at her purchases. Oranges. Bright, exotic, glowing like suns against the gray London air. She carries them as though they are jewels. The poor watch silently, the fruit so far removed from their reality that it seems like treasure from another world. You turn away before longing becomes bitterness. The sight of an orange will not fill your stomach. Better to focus on what might actually be within reach. Toward the far end of the market, laborers gather at a corner, waiting for the call of foremen. Dock work, cart pushing, hauling, casual jobs that pay in coins or sometimes in food. Men stand with their hands in their pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes scanning for opportunity. You join them, your own hunger reminding you why you're here. A man in a thick coat, the foreman, scans the crowd. He points at a few. You and you need strong backs today. Each word is like a judgment. Some men are chosen, others left behind. You stand straighter, trying to look capable, though your stomach growls in protest. Not today. The foreman passes you by. A pang of disappointment sharpens the hunger already inside you. Work means wages, and wages mean food. Without it, you will need to stretch what little you have even further. still you remain. Sometimes another job appears later, sometimes not. Hunger doesn't allow you to give up quickly. You lean against a wall, watching the crowd ebb and flow. Through a basement window nearby, you catch a glimpse of another world. In the kitchen of a wealthy home, a cook directs maids with brisk authority. A large joint of meat turns slowly on a spit. The smell wafts upward, rich and savory. The contrast between your world and theirs is sharp, painful. The food you glimpse through glass could feed your family for a week, yet it will be carved into slices for a single dinner party. You close your eyes, forcing the image away. Dwelling on it only deepens the ache. Instead, you focus on the rhythm of the market, the cries, the clatter, the constant motion. London lives and breathes through its food markets. For the rich, they are places of abundance. For the poor, they are places of longing, strategy, and constant compromise. The morning wears on, your stomach reminding you with each passing minute that bread and weak tea are not enough. The bundle in your pocket grows heavier in your thoughts. Not yet, you remind yourself. Not yet. Survival depends on timing. You shift against the wall, waiting, hoping. In Victorian London, every day begins the same. With hunger, with hope, and with the endless voices of the market shouting into the cold air. Your mother's voice echoes in your mind, "Don't eat it all at once." You touch the small cloth-wrapped bundle in your pocket as though it were gold. Inside is the simplest of treasures, bread, perhaps with a smear of dripping saved from last week. It is your insurance policy against collapse. For the Victorian working poor, this daily bundle is a lifeline. Wrapped in cloth or newspaper, carried to factory floors, docks, and construction sites, it is the meal that keeps you standing through the long hours of labor. There is no lunch hour as you know it today, no neatly packed sandwiches. There is only what your family can spare, carried close to your body, guarded from prying eyes and grasping hands. The trick is discipline. If you eat it all by midday, the afternoon stretches before you like a barren desert. Hunger will gnaw, your strength will falter, and your work might suffer. But if you nibble, if you tear off a corner of bread and chew it slowly, you can trick your body into believing it has more than it does. You find a quiet corner away from the bustle of the market, pulling the bundle into your lap. Carefully you untie the cloth. Inside lies your ration for the day, a piece of hard bread with a thin sheen of fat glistening faintly on the surface. Your stomach growls in eager anticipation, but you force yourself to tear only a small piece. You chew slowly, savoring the way the fat coats your tongue, making the bread less dry. Nearby, another boy eyes you hungrily. His clothes hang in tatters, his face sharp with hunger. "What you got there?" he asks, his voice rough but tinged with longing. "Just bread," you reply, turning slightly away. It feels cruel, but the truth is survival breeds selfishness. To share would mean less for you, less strength for the day. He lingers for a moment, hope flickering in his eyes, before shuffling off in search of easier prey. Guilt burns briefly, but it fades under the sharper pang of hunger. All around you, similar bundles appear as workers take breaks. Some are more fortunate, bread with cheese or maybe a slice of cold meat. Others clutch nothing at all, relying instead on vendors if coins allow. Hunger becomes visible in these small moments, each bundle a measure of a family's fortune. You remember stories your mother told of hot bunking, where families so poor shared not only beds but meals. One loaf of bread divided among 3 or 4 households, each taking turns with the scraps. Hunger does not respect privacy. It binds communities together even as it drives wedges between them. As you finish your small portion, you carefully fold the cloth again, tying the knot tightly. Half remains, half for later. This is how you fight hunger, not with abundance, but with rationing, with patience, with endless self-control. The bell of a nearby church tolls the hour. The market swells with fresh energy. Customers haggle, vendors shout louder, children dart between stalls. The city seems alive with food, yet you know most of it will never pass your lips. The bundle in your pocket is more valuable to you than the glittering displays of oranges and beef. It is survival, plain and simple. As the day stretches on, you catch sight of a mother feeding her children from a similar cloth bundle. She breaks off tiny pieces of bread, dipping them into a cup of weak broth. The children's eyes brighten at each bite, though their bellies will never be full. You wonder if they too dream of roast meats and endless tables as you sometimes do at night. The thought lingers as you head toward the docks again, the bundle pressing warm against your thigh. Hunger is never just physical, it is mental, emotional, constant. To carry food and not eat it is both victory and torment. You pass another vendor, his cart filled with steaming potatoes. Hot jacket potatoes, penny each, he calls. The smell makes your mouth water. You picture biting into one, the steam curling upward, the soft flesh warming your stomach. But then you picture the empty cloth at your hip and you walk on. By mid-afternoon, you allow yourself another bite. Just enough to take the edge off, to keep your legs moving, your mind focused. Hunger sharpens and dulls in waves, and you ride them carefully, like a sailor on rough seas. The bundle teaches you patience. It teaches you discipline. It is the difference between collapse and survival, between enduring the long hours of Victorian labor and failing. When evening comes and you finally return home, the bundle will be empty. Its contents transformed into energy, into endurance, into the simple act of making it through another day. And tomorrow your mother will hand you another, just as precious, just as small. In a world of constant hunger, the daily bundle is a ritual, a tether, a reminder that survival comes not in feasts but in small, careful portions. The word hungry wasn't just a description in Victorian England, it was a label for an entire decade. People called the 1840s the Hungry Forties, a grim name earned by food shortages, rising prices, and a tide of human misery that swept across Britain. Even if you didn't live through it, the shadow of that decade lingers in every loaf of bread and every spoonful of soup. Older neighbors still mutter about the days when flour cost twice what it does now, when riots broke out in towns because working families couldn't afford a simple loaf. Mothers whispered stories of pawning wedding rings for bread or boiling weeds from hedgerows into thin stews. London felt the hunger sharply, but it was not alone. In Ireland, the potato blight devastated entire communities. Families who had relied almost entirely on potatoes for sustenance watched their fields rot. Starvation followed, along with waves of migration. Thousands fled to England, crowding into cities already struggling to feed their own poor. They brought desperation with them, and the competition for food and work grew fiercer. You imagine what it must have been like in those years. Waking to find the market stalls half empty, prices scrawled higher on chalkboards, vendors grim instead of eager. Bread that yesterday cost a penny suddenly costing two. Potatoes, once reliable, turning black and foul in the fields. The hungry weren't just the very poor then. Families that had once managed respectably found themselves teetering on the same edge. Hunger breeds unrest. You've heard tales of bread riots, of crowds storming bakers' shops, demanding lower prices, smashing windows when denied. In some towns, soldiers were called in to protect shipments of grain. Imagine hunger so sharp it drives you to risk musket fire for a sack of flour. That was the Hungry Forties. Even charity strained under the pressure. Workhouses, already grim, overflowed. Families desperate for food submitted themselves to labor under cruel conditions, separated from one another by walls and rules designed to strip away dignity. They make you earn every bite, an old man once muttered to you about his time in the workhouse. The bitterness in his voice said more than his words. Yet somehow people endured. They stretched meals thinner than ever, adding water to soups until the broth was nearly transparent. Bread was bulked out with oats or barley. Some families gathered nettles, dandelion leaves, or even grass from public commons to cook. Survival meant creativity, and creativity was born from desperation. By the late 1840s, conditions began to ease, grain imports, gradual improvements in trade, and sheer endurance brought prices down again. But the memory of those years carved itself deep into the collective mind of the poor. Even in better times, every crumb of bread felt precarious, every market purchase tinged with fear that tomorrow it might all be taken away again. You think of your own family. Your mother was younger then, but she still remembers the gnawing ache, the constant scramble for food. Sometimes she tells you that's why she insists on saving every scrap, reusing every tea leaf until it surrenders its last ghost of flavor. It isn't just thrift, it's memory. Hunger once taught her that nothing, not even the hard heel of bread, should go to waste. As you walk the market today, you notice how that history lingers. Vendors call louder, buyers haggle harder. Everyone knows prices can rise suddenly. Everyone has heard the old stories of shortages and riots. Hunger is never far away in Victorian London. It lives just beneath the surface, in the memories of the Hungry Forties. The city around you has changed since then. The railways bring food from distant farms faster than before. Ships arrive daily from the Empire, carrying sugar, grain, and tea. But for the poor, the difference is smaller than it seems. Bread may be steadier in supply, but wages are still low and work is uncertain. Hunger has not disappeared, it has only shifted shape. A shout cuts through your thoughts. Hot eels. Penny a bowl. The same cry you heard this morning. Abundance in sound, scarcity in reality. You press a hand against your stomach, trying to will the hunger away. The hungry 40s may have passed, but their spirit walks beside you. They are the reason your mother warns you to save your bundle, the reason neighbors clutch coins so tightly, the reason every market feels like a battlefield. Hunger doesn't just exist in the body. It lingers in the memory of a people, teaching caution, discipline, and fear that tomorrow could bring famine again. For now, you keep moving, the lessons of that decade echoing in your steps. Hunger has shaped Victorian London as surely as soot has blackened its walls. By midday, London streets thrum with new energy. Factory bells have rung, dock whistles have sounded, and the city's laborers pour out in search of food. Not meals in dining rooms with polished tables, but whatever can be eaten quickly, cheaply, and often standing up in the mud. The bundle in your pocket grows heavier in your mind. It's time to unwrap it. You find a low stone wall and sit, pulling the cloth open. Inside, bread. Harder now than when your mother packed it, but still edible. The scraping of dripping on the surface has congealed, forming pale streaks of fat. To anyone else it might look unappetizing. To you it looks like fuel. You tear off a piece and chew slowly. The fat softens the bread, coats your mouth with a faint savory taste. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining it's roast meat. Hunger makes imagination a survival tool. Around you, other workers unwrap their lunches. Bread with cheese if they're lucky. Some have cold bacon between slices, though the portions are paper thin. A few carry nothing, hoping to stretch until evening or to find a vendor selling scraps cheap. The streets themselves are full of food for those who can afford it. Pies steam in their tins, their crusts thin and golden. A penny buys one, but inside the filling is more mystery than meat. Onions, potatoes, and a few chewy chunks that might be mutton, or might be something else entirely. But for the poor, taste and truth are secondary. Calories matter more. Nearby, a man ladles pea soup from a portable canister. The smell of split peas, onions, and salt drifts through the air. A penny buys a mugful returned when you've drunk it. The warmth alone is worth the price. Children cluster around a gingerbread seller, eyes wide at the dark, spicy squares. She waves a tray above her head, calling, "Sweet gingerbread, halfpenny apiece." For some, that halfpenny means a rare treat. For others, it's too much to spare. Hunger makes sweetness both luxury and torment. You finish your bread slowly, careful to leave just enough for later. Your stomach protests, but you force yourself to fold the cloth again and tuck it away. Survival depends on rationing, not indulgence. A boy about your age sidles up beside you, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. "Any to spare?" he asks quietly, nodding toward your bundle. His eyes dart nervously, watching for disapproval. You hesitate. His clothes are ragged, his cheeks hollow. But your own hunger answers before your conscience does. "Nothing left," you lie softly. He nods, unsurprised, and drifts away into the crowd. You feel the sting of guilt, but also the sharper truth. Survival rarely allows for generosity. The market grows louder. Vendors shout their wares, customers haggle, and the smell of roasting chestnuts mixes with coal smoke. Food is everywhere, but always at a price. You watch a woman hand over her last coin for a potato, then split it carefully into two halves. One for her, one for the child clinging to her skirts. London's poor are inventive in their meals. A scrap of dripping stretched across bread. Bones bought cheap from butchers boiled into stock, then boiled again until they surrender their last trace of flavor. Vegetables past their prime sold for pennies, revived in soups. Hunger doesn't just create appetite, it creates resourcefulness. You glance upward, catching sight of an upper-class dining room through tall windows. A table set with linen, silverware gleaming. Servants place dishes in front of seated gentlemen. Roast beef, fish, puddings, fruits. The contrast is almost unbearable. The same city, two worlds, one of feasts, the other of scraps. A carriage rattles past and the moment vanishes. You wipe the last crumbs from your hands and stand. The rest of the day looms long and lunch is over. Your stomach is not full, but it is quieter, at least for now. As you rejoin the crowd, the voices of the vendors echo around you. Hot pies, penny each. Fresh herrings, tuppence for 4. Gingerbread, sweet gingerbread. For some, lunch is a chance to eat well. For others, it is simply a pause in the endless negotiation with hunger. For you, it is a reminder. Survival is not measured in feasts, but in small, careful bites that keep you moving through the long Victorian day. Evening in Victorian London comes not with peace, but with exhaustion. The streets, still buzzing with carriages and shouting vendors, begin to dim as the sun sets and coal smoke thickens in the air. You make your way back through alleys and crooked lanes, clutching the small bundle of food you've saved for supper. At home, the familiar smell greets you: cabbage. Not roasted meat, not fragrant bread from a baker's oven, just cabbage boiled until its sharp scent fills every corner of your cramped room. Your mother stirs the pot over the hearth, her face red from the fire's heat, her shoulders slumped from a day's work at laundry. "Bread with it," she says simply, nodding toward the table. A small loaf sits there, the same one she carefully rationed earlier. Tonight, you'll soak pieces into the cabbage soup, softening the crust and making the meal last longer. The soup is thin, a cloudy liquid with soft leaves swirling in it. A potato or two has been added, their starch thickening the broth just enough to give it substance. And floating at the top, miracle of miracles, a sliver of bacon rind. Its fat and salt will spread through the pot, transforming the vegetables into something more than boiled greens. You sit with your mother, bowls in hand. The first sip burns your tongue, but the warmth is welcome. The cabbage has softened, almost sweet from long cooking, and the faint taste of pork clings to the broth. Your stomach, empty since midday, growls loudly. You eat slowly, not from fullness but from caution. Eating too quickly means finishing too soon, and then nothing remains. Around the city, thousands of similar meals are taking place. Vegetable stews in tiny homes, bread soaked in weak tea, fish fried and dripping, filling the air with its oily scent. In boarding houses, strangers share tables and divide loaves, each pretending not to notice how hungrily the others chew. On Sundays, things are different. Even poor families strive for a bit of meat if they can. A shin bone, a sheep's head, or perhaps a joint of mutton boiled until tender. Sunday dinner is not just about food, it is about dignity, a weekly reminder that life can hold moments of plenty, however brief. But tonight is no Sunday, it is just another weekday, and cabbage soup will have to do. You glance at your mother. She eats slowly, deliberately, making sure you have more than she does. You know this game well. Parents pretending to be less hungry than they are, ensuring children have enough to grow strong. You try to push a piece of bread toward her, but she shakes her head. "You need it more," she says softly. After dinner, she saves the broth, pouring it into a small jug. Tomorrow it can be thickened with more vegetables, perhaps flavored again with the same bacon rind. Nothing is wasted. Not bread crusts, not potato skins, not even cabbage water. Waste means hunger, and hunger is never far. The fire burns low. Coal is too expensive to waste, and the night will be cold. Your mother spreads the thin blanket on your shared bed, the straw mattress beneath creaking as you sit. The sounds of the city filter in, a vendor calling hot pea soup. In the distance, carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones, the muffled laughter of men stumbling home from taverns. You lie down, your body heavy from the day's labor but not truly satisfied. The soup sits warm in your belly, yet hunger is not gone. It is simply quiet for now. You curl beneath the blanket, listening as your mother hums softly, an old tune from her childhood in the countryside. In your half-sleep, you imagine fields of vegetables stretching to the horizon, loaves of bread piled high on a table, meat roasting over an open fire. In your dream, the meal never ends. But the reality waits for you in the morning. Another day of careful rationing, another day of scraping together enough to survive. This is the rhythm of Victorian evenings for the working poor. Soup and bread, fatigue and silence, and the endless hope that tomorrow will bring just a little more. Evening markets in Victorian London were a theater of survival. By the time the sun dipped low, stalls that had been bustling since morning grew frantic. Sellers shouted louder, voices hoarse, desperate to rid themselves of perishable goods before night fell. Prices dropped with the light. For those with patience and empty stomachs, this was the best time to shop. You and your mother join the crowd pressing into the market square. The cobblestones are wet from an afternoon drizzle, reflecting the glow of gas lamps that flicker unevenly overhead. The smell of fish mingles with coal smoke and horse manure. It's not pleasant, but it's alive, buzzing with the energy of hundreds of Londoners clawing for bargains. Best prices now, last of the day, calls a fishmonger, sleeves rolled high as he slaps down herring on a wooden slab slick with scales. 6 for tuppence. Earlier in the day he wanted double. Now he waves a knife like a conductor leading an orchestra of hunger. Nearby, a woman with a basket of cabbages lifts one and smacks it against the table to prove its firmness. Still good, penny for 2, she shouts. The outer leaves are wilted, but the heart remains edible. Another vendor, voice rasping, offers turnips, carrots, and onions, each a little soft, but still serviceable for soup. The poor crowd closer, eyes sharp, coins clenched tightly in fists. Your mother is among them, measuring value against every penny. A cabbage might stretch across 3 meals. A handful of onions could turn bland broth into something resembling stew. She haggles quickly, voice firm, and secures 2 cabbages and a sack of carrots for half the price they fetched that morning. You trail her through the throng, clutching a small parcel of herrings she's bartered from the fishmonger. Their briny smell fills your nostrils. Not appetizing on their own, but fried with a bit of dripping, they'll make tomorrow's dinner something to anticipate. As the market winds down, you notice the poorer still, those who wait until the very end. They linger like shadows, hoping for what others leave behind. A baker tosses stale crusts into a sack and children dart forward, begging. Some vendors, unwilling to haul home spoiled goods, quietly hand scraps to the desperate. Others sweep rejects onto the ground, where the boldest scavengers dive to retrieve them. This is the hierarchy of hunger. Those with coins buy bargains. Those without wait for mercy or scraps. Your mother, satisfied with her purchases, gestures toward the exit. The square is thinning now, vendors packing up, pulling down tarps and counting their day's take. Some curse their luck. Others smile at coins jingling in aprons. The air grows colder as the crowd disperses. On the way home, you pass a grand house with its windows glowing warmly against the night. Through the glass you glimpse servants carrying covered dishes into a dining room. The smell wafts out, roast beef, herbs, butter, wine. It's a different world just a few streets away. Your stomach twists, not from hunger alone, but from the cruel contrast. While you and your mother celebrate wilted cabbage and pickled herring, families behind glass feast on meats and puddings you'll never taste. Yet in your mother's eyes there is no bitterness, only determination. We've done well tonight, she says, her voice carrying quiet pride. Back home the haul is unpacked. The cabbages stacked in a corner, the carrots lined neatly on the shelf, the herrings salted again for safekeeping. Tomorrow promises a rare sense of security, meals already planned, food ready at hand. She stirs a pot with what remains of yesterday's soup, stretching it once more with scraps. It's thin but warm, flavored faintly with cabbage and onion. A slice of stale bread soaks up the liquid, softening enough to chew. It isn't a feast, but it's more than nothing. Afterward, she tucks away a small coin in a hidden jar. For Sunday, she whispers. You know what that means? Perhaps a joint of meat or at least a bone from the butcher. A weekly tradition she refuses to surrender, no matter how tight money becomes. As night deepens, you lie again on your straw mattress, the market voices echoing in your mind. 6 for tuppence. Penny for 2. Bargains that mean the difference between survival and hunger. Outside, the vendors' carts rattle away, leaving behind a silence that settles over the city. Your stomach isn't full, but it isn't empty either. A small victory. Tomorrow there will be herrings. The next day, cabbage stew. And with Sunday approaching, maybe even meat. For now, you let your body sink into the straw, the day's noise fading into the background hum of the city. The mattress creaks as you shift, but you don't mind. Tonight, the weight of hunger feels lighter than usual. Morning light leaks through the grimy window once more, and with it comes the promise, or threat, of another day. Your stomach growls before you even sit up. Hunger is punctual in Victorian London, always arriving right on time. Today's excitement? A visit to the butcher's stall. But let's be clear, you're not walking in with coins to buy a nice roast. That's for the well-off who can afford beef joints polished until they shine. For you, the butcher's special section is the tray at the bottom, the one that looks more like a medical exhibit than dinner. Organ meats. Things polite society doesn't want to talk about, but the poor have no choice but to eat. The butcher greets customers with a booming voice. Prime cuts here. Finest beef, best lamb. Then noticing you, he lowers his tone. Tripe? Liver? Kidneys? Maybe the sheep's head? 2 pence and I'll throw in the tongue." He winks as if he's just offered you the bargain of the century. You watch as he slaps a pale, rubbery slab of tripe onto the counter. It jiggles in a way food probably shouldn't. He gestures to it proudly. "Boil it long enough and you'll never notice the smell." Encouraging words, truly. Your mother inspects the options with the eye of a general planning battle strategy. Kidneys could be cooked with onions, if you can afford onions. Liver could be fried, if you don't mind chewing for half an hour. The sheep's head? Well, that's dinner, lunch, and breakfast if you know how to stretch it. She picks a sheep's head, and the butcher wraps it in paper with a grin. "Don't worry, love, it's looking at me, not you," he jokes. You don't laugh. You're fairly certain it is looking at you. Carrying the parcel home is its own adventure. People glance curiously at the bundle under your arm, as though wondering whether you've just robbed a petting zoo. You try to ignore the sheep's ears sticking out of the paper, flopping with every step. Back home, your mother sets to work with grim determination. Preparing offal is part cooking, part science experiment, and part courage. The head goes into a pot with cabbage and onions. Hours later, the meat will soften, the broth turning rich. Every part will be used. Meat for stew, tongue sliced thin, brain mixed into stuffing. Waste nothing, that's the rule. While she works, you're sent to fetch a loaf of bread. At the baker's, you eye the soft white loaves on display. There for the wealthy, their snowy crusts practically glowing. You ask for yesterday's bread, discounted because it's hard enough to double as a weapon. The baker wraps it and hands it over with a smile that says, "Be grateful, it's still edible." Dinner that night is memorable. The sheep's head stew fills the small room with a smell halfway between delicious and unsettling. Your bowl contains chunks of meat so tender they fall apart, surrounded by broth rich with fat. It's filling, warming, and, dare you admit it, tasty. Then comes the tongue, thin slices laid on bread. You hesitate, then bite. It's chewy but flavorful, and you can almost convince yourself it's ham if you close your eyes. Almost. Finally, the brain cakes. Fried until crisp on the outside, soft on the inside, seasoned with whatever herbs your mother could spare. You chew carefully, wondering whether eating brains makes you smarter. Spoiler, it doesn't. But at least it makes you less hungry. As you eat, you can't help but laugh quietly. This meal is absurd in its way. The aristocrats dine on roasts and puddings, the middle classes enjoy their Sunday joints, and here you are, sucking marrow from a sheep's jawbone like it's the highlight of the week. And yet, in its own strange way, it is. After supper, your mother saves every scrap. Bones go back into the pot for stock. Leftover broth will become tomorrow's soup. The skull itself, once picked clean, looks almost like a trophy. "At least it gave us a good dinner," your mother says. You half expect her to mount it on the wall. That night, lying on the straw mattress, your stomach actually feels heavy. It's a rare sensation, fullness. You drift off imagining yourself at a grand banquet, surrounded by platters of fine meat and delicate pastries. Then one of the waiters lifts the lid of a silver dish, and of course, it's just more sheep's heads staring back at you. Even your dreams can't escape reality. Still, you fall asleep with a smile. Survival in Victorian London isn't glamorous, but sometimes it's unintentionally hilarious. And that, perhaps, is its own kind of feast. The morning begins with a small miracle. You're picked for brewery work. The foreman eyes you up and down, mutters something about "good back on that one," and before you know it, you're rolling barrels of beer heavier than you are. Each one sloshes with the weight of liquid gold, or, in your case, liquid backache. The smell of the brewery is unforgettable: yeast, hops, and sweat. If heaven had a bread factory next to a swamp, it might smell like this. Still, it's work, and work means wages, and wages mean food. By noon, your arms feel like noodles. "Half hour for dinner," the foreman shouts. Everyone drops tools and scatters like pigeons at a bakery. Dinner in Victorian terms means the midday meal, and here, it's a sacred ritual. You sit on an empty barrel, unwrap your bundle of bread and leftover sheep's head, and look around. The man next to you produces a wedge of cheese. Another has bacon wrapped in cloth. One older worker reveals a meat pie, steam rising as he breaks it open. "Wife makes one a week," he says proudly, "stretch the scraps with onion and potato. Feeds us 3 days if we're lucky." You nod politely while trying not to stare too obviously at the pie, which looks like the 8th wonder of the world. Your sheep's head sandwich suddenly feels humble. You take a bite anyway, pretending it's roast beef. Spoiler, it's not. Nearby, two men argue about who has the better dinner. My cheese is mature, says one, aged to perfection. The other scoffs. Your cheese is moldy, Tom, you're just too proud to admit it. They laugh, clinking mugs of beer, and for a moment you forget your arms ache. That's the thing about food in these places. It's not just fuel, it's identity. A man with bacon carries himself differently from a man with only bread. A man with pie? He might as well be king of the yard. You sip from a mug of weak beer, part of the pay really, since it's cheaper than water and less likely to make you sick. It tastes yeasty, bitter, but it washes down sheep's head well enough. Besides, alcohol makes everything funnier, including your coworker attempting to balance a whole loaf of bread on his head for a bet. Spoiler, the bread wins. The bell rings too soon. Half an hour vanishes in a blink. You roll back to work, literally, barrels waiting, foreman glaring. The afternoon is harder. Muscles burn, blisters scream, but the sheep's head and bread fuel you just enough to keep pace. By the end of the day, your shirt sticks to your back, your legs wobble like jelly, but the foreman hands you coins. Hard-earned, sweaty coins. Security clinks in your palm. You've survived another day. On the way home, you pass through the market. A vendor calls out, "Black pudding. Fresh this morning, tuppence for two." The idea of blood sausage might make some wrinkle their noses, but to you it sounds like music. Protein and iron, fried up crisp, would be a royal breakfast tomorrow. You buy two. With the last of your coins, you pick up a bruised apple. Not the gleaming kind polished for the rich, but slightly dented, marked by travel. Still, when you bite into it later, the sweet crunch makes you close your eyes. For a moment, it tastes like victory. Back home, your mother beams at your haul. Black pudding for tomorrow, apples for tonight, herrings for later. We'll eat well this week, she says, and you almost believe her. Dinner is fried herrings with potatoes, salty and filling, followed by apples shared equally. You chew slowly, trying to make every bite last. For dessert, your mother pulls out her trump card, a heel of ham given as payment for laundry. She sets it aside for soup later in the week, but just the sight of it sitting on the shelf feels like hope itself. That night, as you lie on your straw mattress, you chuckle at the absurdities of the day. A man boasting about moldy cheese, another losing a fight with bread, yourself gnawing on sheep's head while dreaming of pies. Hunger is always present, but sometimes laughter manages to sit down at the table too. And in Victorian London, that's almost as good as a feast. Sunday in Victorian London begins with church bells, loud, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Your mother wakes you early, insisting you put on your best clothes, which, if we're honest, are just your least patched ones. Still, tradition is tradition, and Sunday means two things: church and dinner. The service is long, the pews hard, and the preacher's voice drones like a broken organ. But everyone sits patiently because they know what waits afterward: food. Even for the poor, Sunday dinner is sacred. Back home, your mother sets to work on the prize of the week, the sheep's head you carried home from the butcher. It sits on the table like a guest no one invited, eyes mercifully closed now, its tongue lolling out as if mocking your hunger. Preparation is half battle, half performance. First, the tongue is removed and set aside. Then the brain, destined for stuffing. Finally, the head itself goes into a pot with onions and cabbage, bubbling like some witch's brew. You watch, fascinated and mildly horrified. "Don't stare," your mother scolds. "It won't cook faster that way." She says this as if sheep heads are just another day in the kitchen, which for her they are. The smell fills the house, rich, meaty, with just a hint of, "Are we sure this is edible?" You fetch parsley from the canal banks, returning triumphantly with a handful of herbs, and a few confused looks from passing children. Your mother smiles. "That'll do nicely." By midday the feast is ready. And feast it is, at least by your standards. The sheep's head meat is tender, falling off the bone. The tongue, sliced thin, makes sandwiches with yesterday's bread. The brain has been transformed into crisp little cakes, fried golden. Potatoes boil cheerfully on the side, and cabbage simmers with a precious spoonful of dripping. Laid out on chipped plates, it looks almost grand. You half expect someone to announce the courses in French. For starters, tongue sandwiches a la stale bread, followed by tête de mouton stew. And for dessert, brain cakes flambé, or at least fried. You and your mother sit, bowls steaming in front of you. For once, you don't rush. Every bite deserves attention. The stew is hearty, the potatoes fluffy, the brain cakes surprisingly delicious. Even the cabbage tastes luxurious with parsley sprinkled on top. Midway through the meal, your neighbor Mrs. Jenkins pops her head in. "Got enough there?" she teases, eyeing the pot. "Plenty," your mother lies smoothly, though you both know the leftovers are already earmarked for 3 more meals. Mrs. Jenkins leaves, muttering about how her own Sunday dinner is only bread pudding. For once you feel like the rich neighbor. The crowning moment comes at dessert. Your mother pulls out the small cone of chestnuts you saved from yesterday. Roasted over the fire, their sweet, nutty smell fills the room. She cracks them open carefully, handing you one like it's treasure. Together you chew slowly, savoring the rare luxury. It isn't much. It isn't roast beef or plum pudding or oranges imported from Spain. But it's warm, filling, and thanks to your mother's skill, borderline delicious. For the first time all week, your stomach feels full, your body heavy with satisfaction instead of exhaustion. Afterward, the cleanup is meticulous. Leftover meat is wrapped, bones set aside for stock, scraps tucked away for tomorrow. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. Even the sheep's skull is scrubbed clean and set out to dry. It looks oddly regal on the shelf, like the trophy of a strange battle won. That evening, as the fire burns low, you stretch out on your straw mattress, belly full, body warm. For once, you don't dream of food, because for once, you've actually eaten enough of it. Instead, your dreams wander to absurd places. A banquet where sheep's heads march proudly across the table, demanding to be eaten in order of seniority. You wake laughing, startling your mother, who shakes her head and mutters, "Too much brain cake, that one." And maybe she's right. But in Victorian London, laughter is as rare a delicacy as meat, and tonight you've had both. The day after Sunday dinner always feels a little brighter. Not because life is easier, but because your stomach isn't chewing on itself for once. You wake with actual energy, which is unusual enough that your mother raises an eyebrow. "Don't get too lively," she warns. "It'll only make you hungrier." The smell of sheep's head broth greets you from the hearth. Bones from yesterday are simmering again, determined to give up every last drop of flavor. Your mother calls it second soup. You suspect it might be slightly cabbage-flavored water, but you don't argue. Waste not, want not. As the broth bubbles, Mrs. Jenkins from next door appears. Of course she does. No door knock, just a sudden head popping in like a character from a play. "Morning, dears," she chirps, her eyes darting to the pot. "Smells good in here. Broth, is it? We only had bread pudding last night." She says this as if it's a tragedy, though you distinctly remember her bragging about that very pudding yesterday. Your mother smiles politely, but you can see the gears turning. Don't let her know we've got leftovers. In Victorian London, food gossip was practically a sport. Neighbors kept track of who managed meat, who lived on potatoes, and who mysteriously always smelled of onions. It wasn't malicious exactly, more like competitive survival. Later on the street, you hear 2 women in shawls debating loudly about recipes. "Boil it 6 hours, I tell you," one insists. "Any less and it's still mooing." The other scoffs. 6 hours? That's not cooking, that's murder. They're arguing about tripe. Yes, tripe, the chewy stomach lining of a cow. Imagine being so poor you're debating the best way to make boiled stomach taste less like boiled stomach. That's Victorian cuisine for you. You pass a group of children crouched around something on the cobblestones. Curious, you lean closer. They're licking treacle off a scrap of paper, eyes wide with glee. One boy looks up, sticky-faced, and declares proudly, "It's pudding night." You don't have the heart to point out that treacle on paper is not technically pudding. But in times like these, imagination is half the meal. By midday, your mother unveils today's experiment, sheep's head pie. This is ambitious, to put it mildly. She mixes yesterday's meat with onions, carrots, and broth, then tops it with a crust made from flour, water, and sheer optimism. Into the hearth it goes. The smell is heavenly, rich and savory, but the final result? Well, let's just say the crust has the texture of a roof tile. You chip off a piece and chew dutifully, trying to look grateful. Your mother sighs. "Well, at least it'll keep our teeth strong." In the afternoon, you're sent to the market for more vegetables. There, you overhear 2 men laughing over a new recipe one's wife has tried, mock goose. Intrigued, you listen closer. Turns out, mock goose isn't goose at all. It's potatoes layered with apples and onions, baked until soft. Tastes nothing like goose, the man admits, but close your eyes and chew hard enough and you can pretend. You make a mental note. Someday you'll tell your grandchildren you lived through the golden age of imaginary poultry. Back home, Mrs. Jenkins reappears, she always does, this time carrying a suspicious-looking pudding. "Spotted Dick," she announces proudly. You nearly choke trying not to laugh, but she's dead serious. It's suet pudding with raisins, perfectly respectable. But you can't help it. Only Victorians could name a dessert like that with a straight face. As evening falls, the street vendors make their rounds. Hot potatoes, penny each. Pea soup steaming hot. One cheeky seller calls, "Real meat pies, probably meat anyway." The crowd laughs nervously because everyone knows food fraud is common. That beef might be horse. That mutton might be cat. But when you're hungry, you don't ask questions. Dinner is another round of sheep's head stew, thickened with flour this time. It's hearty, warming, and almost tasty enough to forget that you're on day 3 of eating the same animal. Your mother jokes, "If this sheep doesn't last us till Wednesday, I'll have words with it in the afterlife." You laugh harder than you should because humor is seasoning in a world short on salt. That night, as you lie in bed, you hear neighbors through the thin walls. Mrs. Jenkins complaining about her pudding burning, someone else boasting about a potato pie, and children singing about hot eels in the street. It's absurd, chaotic, and somehow comforting. Victorian life may be hungry, but at least it's never boring. By the time you step outside the next morning, the street is already alive with the clamor of vendors. Each one bellows like an opera singer who has chosen hungry stomachs as their audience. If food was theater, Victorian London was Broadway. First comes the eel woman. You hear her before you see her. "Hot eels. Penny a bowl," she hollers, her voice raspy but unstoppable. Her cart is a cauldron of steaming broth, pieces of eel bobbing like unwilling actors in a very fishy soup. Customers clutch mugs, slurp loudly, and return the vessels, looking both satisfied and slightly confused about what just happened to their mouths. Next, a man with a tray strapped around his neck walks. "Whelks?" he cries, scooping out sea snails preserved in brine. You watch a dockworker tip back a scoop like peanuts, then immediately regret it as his face contorts. Whelks are chewy, salty, and taste vaguely like the ocean's revenge. But hey, they're cheap. Then there's the sheep's trotter seller. Yes, trotters. He brandishes a boiled sheep's foot like it's fine dining, shouting, "Meat that sticks to your bones." You can't help wondering if the foot once belonged to the very sheep you ate last week. London's food supply feels suspiciously circular. A potato seller pushes his cart next. Steam rises from baked spuds, split open with a puff of heat. "Hot taters, penny each," he calls, handing one to a small boy who hugs it to his chest like treasure before biting in. Unlike eel jelly or boiled trotters, potatoes are universally beloved. They're hot, filling, and crucially don't stare back at you. But the prize for entertainment goes to the gingerbread man. Not the cookie itself, but the vendor. He's a wiry fellow with a theatrical flair, holding up molded gingerbread figures shaped like horses, queens, and, bafflingly, tiny coffins. "Sweetest gingerbread in London," he declares, waving a gingerbread coffin at a child who looks equal parts thrilled and terrified. "Eat it before it eats you." The crowd laughs, coins clink, and suddenly the child is gnawing happily on funeral-themed dessert. You can't help grinning at the absurdity. Victorian street food isn't just about eating, it's about performance. Every seller is an entertainer, every cart a stage, every bowl of eel soup or potato a ticket to survival. Of course, not all vendors are honest. You overhear one man whisper, "Careful with those pies, mate. Yesterday's beef was last week's alley cat." Food fraud is legendary in this era. Bread with chalk, milk with plaster, sweets colored with arsenic. You silently decide that if something glows in the dark, you won't eat it. Probably. By midday, you give in to temptation and buy a baked potato. It's piping hot, burns your fingers, and nearly singes your tongue, but it's glorious. Plain, simple, earthy. You eat it slowly, letting the steam warm your face in the cold air. Across the street, a man is bravely tackling eel jelly, cold, wobbling cubes of gelatinous fish. He chews thoughtfully, shrugs, and mutters, "Could be worse." You're not convinced. Later, you pass a vendor selling bullseye candies, red and white striped mints, cheap enough for even the poor to occasionally indulge. Children swarm the stall, sticky hands reaching out. You watch one boy pop a bullseye into his mouth, eyes going wide at the sudden hit of sugar. He spins in circles as if the candy alone gave him new life. For a moment, laughter drowns out hunger. That evening back home, you describe the day's market circus to your mother. She chuckles as you imitate the gingerbread man's coffin pitch. "Eat it before it eats you," she laughs, wiping her hands on her apron. Even in hardship, humor has a way of slipping in, seasoning life like a pinch of salt. Dinner is plain cabbage soup again, but with the memory of the potatoes' warmth and the gingerbread man's absurd show, it tastes better somehow. You soak bread in the broth, chew slowly, and let the laughter linger longer than the flavor. That night, lying on your straw mattress, you replay the sights: steaming eel pots, shrieking potato vendors, coffins made of gingerbread. Victorian London is hungry, yes, but it's also ridiculous, and sometimes ridiculousness is enough to keep you going. If cabbage was the vegetable of Victorian survival, sugar was its miracle drug. Not because it was healthy, quite the opposite, but because it made even misery taste better. You first notice it on the street. Children race past, hands sticky, faces smeared with treacle. One boy waves a red and white bullseye candy like it's a medal from the Queen herself. Another proudly licks what looks suspiciously like a sugar stick dipped straight into dirt. Nobody cares. Sugar means joy, and joy is scarce. The sweet sellers know their audience. "Bullseyes. Humbugs. Toffees, half a penny," cries one, shaking paper bags like rattles. A rival yells, "Treacle toffee. Stick to your teeth and never let go." It's not false advertising. Half the city probably lost their molars to that very toffee. You buy one bullseye to share with your mother. The peppermint sting makes your eyes water, but for a moment the world feels brighter. She smiles at the sharp sweetness, then carefully wraps the half-sucked candy in cloth to finish later. Nothing wasted, not even a bullseye. But sugar isn't just about candy. It sneaks into everything. Treacle drizzled on bread, jam stretched thin across stale loaves, pudding soaked with syrup until they wobble dangerously on chipped plates. Each bite is a reminder that the British Empire runs on two things: coal and sugar. Of course, sugar has a dark story behind its sweetness. Ships unload sacks of it at the docks, each grain tied to brutal plantations thousands of miles away. Dockworkers sometimes sneak handfuls of spilled crystals, their pockets sweet with contraband. You once helped unload a sugar ship, your hands raw from the heavy sacks. But the reward, spoonfuls of white treasure for tea, was worth every blister. Children especially become unrecognizable after sugar. You've seen it happen. One moment they're quiet, thin little ghosts of hunger. Then a vendor hands them a humbug and suddenly they're sprinting like Olympic athletes, shrieking as though sugar itself has possessed them. Parents pretend to be annoyed, but secretly they're glad their children can laugh, even if it's just for the length of a sweet. The rich, of course, take sugar to an entirely different level. Their kitchens turn it into elaborate sculptures, sugar-spun castles, and cakes stacked higher than your head. You once glimpsed a wedding feast through a window, a sugar swan floating on a mirror of jelly. Meanwhile, you and your neighbors debate whether jam counts as fruit. At home, your mother experiments with her own luxury. She boils down the last of some overripe plums with a spoonful of precious sugar. The sticky result, barely a jam, she spreads on bread. It's not much, but when you bite in, it feels like cheating poverty itself. You lick your fingers clean, unwilling to waste even a trace. The neighborhood children turn sugar into gossip. "I had a ginger snap yesterday," one boasts. "Well, I had spotted Dick." Another retorts, proudly naming the suet pudding with raisins, ignoring the giggles from anyone with a sense of humor. Even Mrs. Jenkins joins in, appearing at your door with a lump of treacle pudding, announcing, "Made too much." She doesn't fool anyone, she wants to brag. By evening, the sugar rush fades. Children collapse in piles, mothers sigh in relief, and the streets quiet down. You sit with your mother, sipping weak tea sweetened with just a pinch of saved sugar. The taste lingers longer than the drink itself, warming not just your stomach but your spirit. As you lie down on your straw mattress that night, you think about how strange it is. Cabbage keeps you alive, bread keeps you full, but sugar keeps you human. It's proof that even in the hardest times, people crave more than survival. They crave sweetness, even if it's only once in a while. And so you drift into sleep, dreaming of rivers of treacle and bullseyes the size of carriage wheels. In the dream, your teeth don't fall out, which might be the funniest miracle of all. Victorian London had two menus, the one you could afford and the one you could imagine. When money was scarce, creativity took over, and so was born the golden age of mock dishes, meals that pretended to be something grand but were, in truth, clever disguises for cheap ingredients. Take mock turtle soup. The aristocrats loved real turtle soup, exotic, expensive, brought from far-off seas. The poor? They made do with calf's head boiled until the meat fell apart, seasoned with whatever herbs were on hand. Add a splash of vinegar and a lot of imagination and voila! Mock turtle soup. If you closed your eyes and ignored the smell of boiled cow face, you might just believe you were dining like a lord. Then there was mock goose. Goose was a luxury bird, juicy and fat, far beyond the reach of most families. So someone had the brilliant idea to layer potatoes, apples, and onions, bake them together, and call it goose. Did it taste like goose? Absolutely not. But if you squinted and chewed slowly, you could at least pretend it had wings. Even desserts weren't safe from this culinary pantomime. A famous one was mock cream, which was simply flour, milk, and sugar whipped until it looked fluffy. Spread it on bread, and if you had never tasted real cream in your life, you might even be impressed. Children loved it, parents tolerated it, and nobody dared complain. It was better than nothing. Your mother tries her hand at mock dishes from time to time. Tonight, she announces triumphantly, "We're having mock rabbit." You blink at the pot. Inside are breadcrumbs mixed with onions and a bit of leftover dripping, shaped into patties. Rabbit? Not even close. But when she serves them with cabbage and gravy made from stock bones, you admit they're surprisingly tasty. More mock meatball than mock rabbit, but who's counting? Neighbors compete over whose mock dish is best. Mrs. Jenkins brags about her mock plum pudding, made without plums. Raisins and treacle, she declares, just as good as the real thing. You try not to laugh when her pudding collapses mid-sentence, looking more like a deflated cabbage than dessert. One man in the market swears he can make mock coffee out of roasted acorns and burnt bread. He offers you a sip. It tastes like someone set fire to a loaf and poured water over the ashes. Still, he insists, cheaper than the real thing. He's not wrong, though your tongue begs to differ. The comedy of it all is that Victorians knew they were fooling themselves, but they went along with the act anyway. Pretend foods gave dignity to meals that otherwise screamed poverty. Saying you had mock goose sounded far better than admitting you only ate potatoes and onions. By late evening, the streets are alive with laughter about these dishes. A group of children sings a rhyme. Mock turtle, mock goose, mock pie in the pan. We'll eat it all gladly if we can, if we can. Their voices echo down the alley, proof that imagination feeds the spirit, even if not the belly. At home, you chew the last bite of mock rabbit and grin at your mother. Tastes just like the real thing, you say with mock seriousness. She rolls her eyes but smiles anyway. In truth, the trick isn't fooling your tongue, it's fooling your heart, reminding yourself that even the poor can share in the grand feast of make-believe. And so, when you lie down on your straw mattress that night, you dream not of cabbage or bread, but of a giant goose that turns into a mountain of potatoes. Somewhere in the absurdity, you laugh in your sleep. Because in Victorian London, sometimes survival means playing pretend, fork in hand, imagination on the menu. If Victorian food had a motto, it would be, waste not, want not. Every scrap mattered, and every bone had a destiny far beyond its first stew. Take the humble soup bone. Bought for a penny, it could flavor a pot 3 or even 5 times if boiled with enough vegetables, or weeds, thrown in. The joke was that by the 5th boil, you were making bone-flavored water. Mrs. Jenkins once claimed she'd boiled the same bone for a whole week. Nobody believed her until she showed it. Smooth, pale, and hollow like some sort of culinary fossil. She swore it still had a bit of goodness left. Your mother is a master at stretching food. Tonight's dinner begins with yesterday's soup stock, enriched with a scrap of bacon rind and wilted cabbage. Tomorrow, the same pot will reappear with barley added, magically transformed into a new dish. By the 3rd day, it's more memory than meal, but still, it fills a belly. Neighbors get creative too. Across the street, the Thompsons once threw a party with what they called the Grand Trifle. Everyone gathered, expecting custard, cream, and sponge. Instead, it was layers of stale bread, watered-down jam, and whatever fruit they could find. The guests pretended to enjoy it, but the looks on their faces suggested they'd rather chew their own boots. And yet, there's pride in this resourcefulness. The poor could turn scraps into meals, leftovers into feasts. Sunday's sheep's head became Monday's soup, Tuesday's pies and Wednesday's sandwiches. Nothing left behind except bones, which then went to the rag and bone man. Even potato peels had value, fried into crispy snacks or fed to pigs if you were lucky enough to know someone keeping one. One evening, your mother unveils what she calls bread pudding. You eye it suspiciously. It looks like damp bricks. But when you take a bite, it's surprisingly sweet, the stale bread softened with milk and sugar. Never judge a pudding by its cover, she quips, and you laugh harder than you should. Hunger makes everything funnier. Food preservation was an adventure of its own. Salt pork hung from beams, smelling suspiciously like old boots. Pickled herrings lived in barrels that could outlast an entire winter. Mrs. Jenkins once attempted to pickle leftover cabbage, only to forget about it. Weeks later, the smell was so powerful that even the alley cats refused to go near her door. She declared it a success anyway. Keeps the neighbors away, doesn't it? Even the act of saving leftovers carried humor. At a shared meal, people guarded plates like hawks. The moment anyone slowed down, a hand might swoop in. You finishing that? There was no shame in scavenging. A single potato left unattended could start a minor war. But perhaps the funniest part was how leftovers gained new names each time. Monday, sheep's head soup. Tuesday, hearty stew. Wednesday, working men's broth. By Thursday, it was officially hot water with ambition. Families laughed about it because laughter made the thin soup taste thicker. You remember once biting into a pie at a neighbor's house. "What's in it?" you asked politely. "Oh, leftovers," the cook replied vaguely. You chewed cautiously, trying not to think too hard. Better not to know. At the end of the week, when the cupboards are nearly bare, your mother manages a small miracle. Fried potato cakes made from scraps of mash, mixed with onion and crisped in the pan. They smell heavenly, taste even better, and you eat them as if they were a banquet. She grins at your enthusiasm. "The trick isn't having plenty," she says. "The trick is making the little you have feel like plenty." That night, lying in bed, you think about the comedy of survival. Neighbors competing over who boiled a bone longer. Kids pretending bread pudding was cake from the queen's table. Adults renaming leftover soup like it was brand new. It's ridiculous, but it works. And as you drift into sleep, full from potato cakes and laughter, you realize something. Leftovers may not feed the body much, but they feed the spirit in ways you never expected. If food kept the poor alive, drink kept them moving. Victorians didn't just eat their way through hardship, they drank through it too. And depending on your luck, your cup held salvation, ruin, or both. The most common? Beer. Cheap, plentiful, and crucially, safer than the water. In many working-class homes, beer was practically breakfast. Children drank small beer, a weak brew with barely enough alcohol to wobble a mouse. Adults went for stronger stuff, often straight from the brewery where barrels rolled endlessly onto carts. You remember the day at the brewery when one man tried to sneak a sip from a leaking cask. The barrel lid popped and he was drenched head to toe in frothy ale. Instead of shame, he bowed to the cheering workers like a victorious gladiator. "Best bath I've ever had," he bellowed. Then there was gin, the notorious mother's ruin. Strong, cheap, and devastating. Whole families disappeared into the fog of gin shops, emerging broke and broken. Some vendors sold it by the glass, others by the penny. You once walked past a gin palace glowing with gaslight, its mirrors reflecting rows of bottles like liquid jewels. Inside, customers laughed too loudly, cried too suddenly, and staggered too quickly. Outside, wives dragged husbands by their collars, scolding them in language that would peel paint. Still, gin wasn't always tragedy. On cold nights, gin mixed with hot water, sugar, and lemon could feel like medicine. One dock worker swore gin cured his cough. Judging by how often he coughed just to justify another glass, you weren't so sure. But the true miracle drink of Victorian life was tea. If beer was fuel and gin was escape, tea was comfort. By mid-century, it had become a daily necessity even for the poor. Weak, yes, sometimes leaves reused 2 or 3 times, but still, tea brought warmth, routine, and dignity. Your mother treats tea with reverence. She saves the precious leaves in a tin, guarding them like treasure. When she pours the steaming liquid, she exhales as if the whole world just became bearable. Even with no milk, no sugar, and barely a color darker than dishwater, tea feels like luxury. One neighbor takes the ritual too far. Mr. Higgins insists on proper tea with milk and sugar, though nobody's seen him buy either in months. Rumor has it he dunks bread crusts in weak beer, calls it milk, and swirls in treacle when he can find it. The neighbors snicker, but they still accept his offers. A hot drink is a hot drink. Street vendors capitalized too. Hot tea. Penny a cup, they cried, carrying kettles through markets. Workers gathered around, warming their hands on tin mugs. One seller even offered bottomless refills, until someone literally tested it, draining his kettle dry. After that, the sign mysteriously vanished. And then there were the more unusual beverages. Sarsaparilla touted as a healthy tonic, though it mostly tasted like sweet mud. Posset, a hot milk and ale mix that sounded like dessert but looked like regret. Vinegar drinks for health, which smelled more like punishment. By far, the funniest were the so-called medicinal tonics. Traveling salesmen promised miraculous cures in bottles labeled with fancy names, Elixir of Strength, or Dr. Boggle's Vital Brew. You tried one once. It tasted like herbs soaked in turpentine. Whether it cured anything is debatable, but it certainly convinced you never to buy it again. Back home, drinks played as central a role as food. Supper might be nothing more than bread and dripping, but with hot tea beside it, the meal felt complete. And on special Sundays, your mother mixed leftover beer with spices and sugar, declaring it punch. It tasted odd, but for one evening it made everyone laugh more loudly, sing more boldly, and forget hunger just a little longer. That night, as you settle into your straw mattress, the city hums with the sound of drink. Somewhere, workers sing rowdy songs, their voices slurred but joyful. Somewhere else, a fight breaks out outside a gin shop, ending with two men laughing and staggering off together. And in countless homes, mothers sip weak tea, children drink small beer, and everyone feels, for one fleeting moment, that life is manageable. Sleep creeps over you with the warmth of tea still in your belly. In your dreams, you drink from a bottomless mug, each sip transforming into something new: beer, gin, tea, even oranges. You laugh in your sleep because only in dreams can the poor have it all. If weekday food was about survival, Sunday food was about respectability. Even the poorest Victorian families tried to make Sunday special. It started with church. You'd dress in your patched but best clothes, stomach grumbling, and join the congregation. The sermon might drone on, but everyone was secretly thinking about the same thing: Sunday dinner. For the wealthy, it meant roasts and puddings and servants rushing about. For the poor, it meant something slightly better than cabbage soup. A sheep's head, a bit of bacon, or if you were really lucky, a roast potato with dripping. But still, it was tradition. Sometimes churches hosted communal meals. Long tables stretched across drafty halls, groaning under simple but plentiful food. Bread, soup, maybe boiled beef if a wealthy patron had been generous. The trick was to get there early. Arrive late, and you might be left with little more than broth that looked like it had been waved near a cow. You remember one Sunday when the vicar proudly announced, "Today, roast beef for all." The crowd cheered until the platters came out. There were 3 thin slices of beef and 300 hungry mouths. The solution? Cut the beef into slivers so thin you could see daylight through them. The vicar called it generous sharing. Most called it the beef that vanished. Still, charity meals had their comedy. Mrs. Jenkins once showed up with a cabbage the size of her head, insisting it was her donation. The women running the kitchen sighed but chopped it in anyway. Later, she bragged that her cabbage had fed the whole parish. Technically true if you counted 1 leaf per bowl. Potluck-style gatherings could be even more entertaining. Families brought whatever they could spare, and the results were creative. One man arrived with a pie, announcing proudly, "Pigeon pie fresh." But halfway through serving, someone spotted the tail feathers poking out. It was pigeon, all right, still partly attached. The pie was quickly relabeled mystery meat and quietly ignored. Children loved these events most. Not for the sermons, but for the chance to run around with other children and sneak extra sweets when the adults weren't looking. Once, you caught 2 boys stuffing pockets with currant buns until their trousers sagged comically. They waddled out of the hall looking like very short, very guilty bakers. Back home, Sunday dinner was simpler but sacred. Your mother saved scraps all week to make something hearty. Potatoes roasted until crispy, cabbage stewed with dripping, maybe even a pudding made from stale bread and sugar. It wasn't about extravagance, it was about dignity. Sitting at the table, saying grace and pretending just for one meal that you lived in a world of plenty. Of course, neighbors always compared dinners afterward. We had roast, someone would say, conveniently forgetting it was one slice of mutton shared among 6. We had pudding, another chimed, though it was really boiled flour with treacle. The exaggerations were part of the fun. Nobody wanted to admit they'd eaten nothing but soup again. One year, a wealthy merchant donated oranges to the entire parish at Christmas. You still remember the shock, bright fruit shining like gold coins, the sharp citrus scent filling the hall. People peeled them slowly, savoring every bite as though eating sunshine itself. The children gnawed peels to make the taste last. For weeks afterward, everyone boasted, "Did you taste the orange?" as if it were proof of social advancement. That night, after a Sunday dinner of bread pudding and roasted potatoes, you felt unusually full. Not just with food but with a sense of belonging. Church bells faded into the distance, neighbors laughed in the street, and even the smoky London air seemed softer. Lying in bed later, you smiled at the thought of it all. Slivers of beef thin enough to vanish, cabbage that claimed to feed a parish, and oranges treated like treasure. Poverty was harsh, but Sundays reminded everyone of something bigger, that sharing food, even scraps, could feel like a feast. And with that thought, you drifted into sleep, dreaming of endless tables, plates never empty, and oranges that never ran out. Work in Victorian London didn't just shape lives, it shaped stomachs. The rhythm of meals often followed the rhythm of factories, docks, and workshops, where food had to be quick, cheap, and portable. At the docks, men balanced hunks of bread and cheese on barrels between loads. One man you knew swore the cheese kept the rats away, though the rats seemed to disagree, nibbling brazenly at the edges while he shouted at the mid-bite. Factory workers often had only minutes for meals. Children darted outside with slices of bread, sometimes spread with lard if their families were lucky. One boy claimed his bread and onion sandwich gave him super strength. Judging by the onion breath that cleared half the yard, he might have been right. Builders had their own routines. Lunch might be a pasty filled with potatoes and turnips, wrapped in paper to keep it warm. You once saw a man eat his pasty while perched high on scaffolding, crumbs raining down on passers-by. When a woman yelled, "Mind my hat," he shouted back, "Free topping, madam." Beer was a constant companion. Even at midday, mugs of ale clinked beside half-eaten loaves. It wasn't drunkenness, at least not always, but habit, and water wasn't trusted. More than one apprentice staggered back to work after liquid lunch, earning scowls from foremen who pretended they'd never done the same. Food vendors thrived outside workplaces. Women sold pies, potatoes, or pea soup from carts, shouting like clockwork at meal breaks. One clever vendor stationed herself at a textile mill, selling steaming mugs of broth. Workers poured out at noon and she shouted, "Hot soup for tired hands." It was brilliant marketing. She sold out daily, though most suspected the meat in her broth once meowed. Even in the grimiest jobs, people found humor. At a tannery, one worker claimed he could cook potatoes by burying them near the vats of hot chemicals. He wrapped one in cloth, waited an hour, then proudly pulled it out, green, slimy, and smelling like leather. Nobody dared take a bite, but he swore it tasted unique. Food became currency at work too. A crust of bread could be traded for help lifting a barrel, a slice of bacon for someone else to finish your shift. One man offered you a whole apple once, slightly bruised, in exchange for covering him while he sneaked a nap. You took the deal. The apple was worth it. Children in factories often turned meals into games. They'd count who had the fanciest lunch, though fancy usually meant jam instead of dripping. Once, a boy unwrapped what looked like roast beef. The others gasped in awe, until he admitted it was beetroot dyed brown by accident. He still won the contest. Of course, not all workplace food was funny. Hunger was constant. Many ate little more than bread, washed down with weak tea, their energy stretched thin over endless hours. But the shared struggle created bonds. Breaking bread, literally, wasn't just about eating but about community. One of your fondest memories came from a brewery job. At the end of a long day, the foreman handed each man a mug of leftover ale. Exhausted, aching, you raised mugs together, clinked them against the barrels, and drank. The taste was sharp, the moment sweeter. That night at home, you told your mother about the day's pasty rainstorm and onion breath champion. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the kettle. Dinner was plain soup again, but the stories made it feel richer. Lying in bed later, you realized something. Food at work wasn't about flavor. It was about survival, yes, but also about solidarity. Every bite, however humble, was shared, joked about, turned into something more than just fuel. And so, you drifted to sleep dreaming of scaffolding picnics, soup carts on wheels, and bread and onion sandwiches strong enough to topple empires. If you thought your bread was just flour, yeast, and water, welcome to Victorian London, where food sometimes came with surprise ingredients. And not the fun kind. Bakers were notorious for stretching flour with chalk, alum, or even powdered bones. You'd bite into bread and crunch on something gritty. Extra fiber, a neighbor once joked, though nobody laughed when they realized their teeth might crack before the crust did. Milk sellers were no better. They'd water down milk, then add chalk to make it look creamy. Children drank it every morning, and one mother sighed, "At least they'll grow strong bones." You weren't sure whether she was serious or just too tired to care. Coffee was another victim. Vendors patted it with roasted acorns, chicory, or, so the rumor went, sawdust. One man proudly told you his morning coffee was robust. You suspected he meant wood-based. Even sweets weren't safe. Bright candies for children often got their color from toxic dyes. Green came from arsenic, red from lead. Kids licked lollipops that could kill them and still begged for more. You once heard a street seller joke, "Our sweets are so good they'll knock you dead." He wasn't lying. Beer, too, sometimes hid scandal. Publicans were accused of diluting ale with water or adding tobacco juice to darken the color. A tipsy man claimed it gave him extra kick. More likely, it gave him stomach cramps. These scandals didn't stay hidden forever. The newspapers exposed them, running stories that horrified readers and made headlines like, "Poison in the Pantry." Reformers pushed for laws, leading to the 1860 Adulteration of Food and Drink Act. But enforcement was patchy and the jokes continued. On the streets, humor was the poor man's shield. When your bread crumbled with grit, you'd grin at your neighbor, "Guess the baker's selling sand now." If your tea tasted odd, someone would mutter, "Aye, brewed with broom bristles, no doubt." Food fraud even inspired street songs. Children chanted, "Milk so thin you see the cow swim. Bread so white it shines at night." The laughter didn't erase the hunger, but it made it bearable. You remember once buying cheap sausages from a vendor. "Best pork in London," he swore, though the meat looked suspiciously gray. After one bite, your friend spat it out, swearing it tasted like cat. The vendor only winked. "Cat? Dog? Rat? Who can tell once it's minced?" You skipped sausages for a month. Still, the poor couldn't be choosy. You bought what you could afford and prayed it wouldn't make you sick. The lucky ones had mothers or wives who could sniff out fraud. Yours once held up a loaf and declared, "Too light, must be full of chalk." She was right. By evening, the family who bought it complained of stomach cramps. Even markets weren't safe. Fishmongers rubbed old fish with fresh salt to disguise the smell. Fruit sellers polished bruised apples with grease to make them shine. One daring butcher tried to pass off horse meat as beef. When caught, he shrugged, "Beef with extra horsepower." Despite the risks, you couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. People joked that eating in London built immunity to anything. "If the cholera doesn't get you, the bread will," became a common saying. One evening, as you and your mother ate cabbage soup, she sighed, "At least cabbage can't be faked." Just then, a neighbor burst in laughing. Someone down the street had sold dyed turnip leaves as spinach. Even cabbage wasn't safe. But through all this, humor thrived. Had to. Without jokes, the bitterness of being cheated would have crushed spirits. Instead, Londoners turned scams into satire, scandals into songs, and even poison into punchlines. Lying in bed that night, your stomach turning from gritty bread, you chuckled anyway. Because in Victorian London, if you didn't laugh about your food, you might just cry instead. For most of the year, food in Victorian London was about survival. But every now and then, the calendar delivered a gift. Feast days, holidays, and fairs where even the poor could eat like royalty. Well, royalty with a slightly smaller budget. Take Christmas. The Victorians practically invented the holiday as we know it, thanks to Charles Dickens and Queen Victoria's German traditions. Even poor families scraped together pennies for a special meal. Goose or turkey was the dream, but potatoes, cabbage, and maybe a meat pudding stood in just fine. If money was tight, some families roasted a rabbit and called it Christmas goose. A joke in the street said, "If it hops, squawks, or swims, it's Christmas dinner." Markets before Christmas were chaotic. Vendors shouted about plump geese, oranges, and spices. while children pressed their noses against windows displaying fruitcakes they'd never taste. One boy declared proudly, "We'll have pudding too." His mother nodded, though their plum pudding was more flour than plum. Still, the smell of nutmeg made it feel festive. Easter brought hot cross buns, sold on street corners with the cry, "1 a penny, 2 a penny, hot cross buns." They were small, sweet, and spiced, treats poor children treasured. Of course, bakers sometimes cut corners, substituting currants with raisins or skipping fruit altogether. People laughed, hot cross bun with no cross and no fruit, just hot. Then came street fairs. These were the real spectacles. Stalls overflowed with gingerbread figures, roasted chestnuts, meat pies, and toffee apples. You could smell the fare from streets away, sugar caramelizing, meat sizzling, beer sloshing. Children ran wild, clutching sticky sweets while their parents haggled for fried fish. At one fair you once witnessed a man juggling pies. Not for entertainment, he was trying to carry 3 at once while his kids clung to his legs. He dropped one, scooped it up, blew on it, and served it anyway. 5-second rule, he declared, though it landed squarely in horse muck. His wife refused to eat it, but the kids didn't care. Public feasts were another rare delight. When Queen Victoria celebrated jubilees, towns across England hosted massive street banquets. Tables stretched for blocks, covered with loaves of bread, boiled beef, and barrels of beer. You once heard of a boy who ate so much pudding at one of these feasts that he fell asleep under the table and was carried home like a sack of flour. The story made the rounds for weeks, everyone laughing as if they'd been there. Fairs also brought novelty foods. One vendor sold portable soup, concentrated stock dried into cakes. Just add hot water and you had instant broth, Victorian cup noodles. Another stall offered candied ginger, promising it cured everything from seasickness to bad moods. "Eat 2 pieces and your wife won't nag for a week," the seller cried. Husbands bought them by the handful. Food at these events wasn't just about eating. It was performance, spectacle, and joy. Gingerbread men shaped like famous politicians mocked the powerful. Enormous puddings were paraded through streets before being devoured by cheering crowds. Children sang rhymes about buns, pies, and candy. The poor, for once, weren't only surviving, they were celebrating. Back home, festival leftovers were stretched for days. A single goose might become soup, pie, and dripping spread across bread. Fruit peels were candied, bones boiled into broth, even crumbs saved for pudding. Nothing went to waste, yet for those few days, it felt like abundance. Lying in bed after one such fare, stomach happily full of gingerbread and potatoes, you couldn't help but laugh at the memory of a drunken man trying to ride a goose through the market. He fell off after 2 steps, and the goose waddled away triumphant. Even in poverty, festivals brought stories you'd retell for years. For Victorians, these moments of feasting didn't erase hardship, but they punctuated it with joy. They reminded people that life was more than hunger, that even the poorest deserved a little celebration. And if that celebration sometimes included mock goose or a questionable pie from a fairground, well, that was part of the fun. When hunger became unbearable, Victorian London had one last safety net: charity. Churches, philanthropists, and social reformers ran soup kitchens, ragged schools, and food depots meant to feed the destitute. Noble in theory, but in practice? Well, let's just say the soup often had more water than substance. The Soup Society model was simple: boil bones, cabbage leaves, onions, and barley until they surrendered their essence, then ladle it out by the gallon. A penny for those who could pay, free for those who could not. Reformers bragged that one pot could feed hundreds. The poor joked that one pot could also drown a rat without anyone noticing. You once queued for such a meal on a bitter winter day. The line stretched down the block, people stamping their feet for warmth, children coughing into rags. When your turn came, a ladle of steaming liquid splashed into your tin mug. It was hot, salty, and vaguely meaty. If you closed your eyes, you could imagine beef. Open them and you saw more cabbage than cow. Still, beggars couldn't be choosers. Some even developed favorites. "The soup at St. Mary's tastes of onions," one man said proudly. "Better than the one by the docks, which tastes like someone boiled old boots." Bread often accompanied the soup, but rarely fresh. Day-old, sometimes moldy, donated by bakers who couldn't sell it. Mothers would scrape off green spots, dunk the bread into the broth, and declare it dinner. Children didn't complain. Hunger was a seasoning more powerful than salt. Charitable meals came with strings attached too. Some kitchens required prayers before eating. Others made attendance at sermons mandatory. Hungry Londoners nicknamed one place Soup for Souls. The deal was simple: swallow the gospel, then swallow the broth. One cheeky boy whispered, "I'd sit through the 10 Commandments twice if they just add a bit of beef." Philanthropists often congratulated themselves. Newspapers ran stories about wealthy donors handing out food at Christmas, posing proudly beside enormous tureens. The poor laughed behind their hands. "Funny, I never saw that gentleman eating his own soup," one woman quipped. Not all charity was stingy. The Salvation Army, founded in the 1860s, set up food depots with affordable meals, hot pies, stews, even tea. Some were hearty enough to actually fill bellies, and the army became a lifeline for many. Still, jokes spread. The pies are so holy you can see daylight through them. Other reformers experimented with cheap nutrition. One doctor invented a high-protein biscuit made from pea flour, claiming it could sustain a man for a day. The poor nicknamed it brick food because it was as hard as masonry. You tried one once. Chewing took longer than your lunch break. Despite the flaws, charity kitchens mattered. For many, they were the difference between life and death in lean times. Children in ragged schools often received porridge or bread with dripping, the only solid meal of their day. A teacher once noted, "They learn better after food." The children themselves joked, "We spell better when our stomachs aren't spelling hunger." At home, your mother sometimes grumbled about pride. "We'll manage without handouts if we can," she said, stirring cabbage soup. But when times were desperate, even she queued up, scarf pulled low to avoid neighbors' eyes. Poverty carried shame even when everyone was poor. Yet humor softened the sting. Neighbors compared soups as if they were fine wines. "Ah yes, a hint of marrow bone with notes of turnip," one man sniffed dramatically. Another replied, "More like a muddy puddle with extra pepper." The laughter rippled through the line, warming spirits more than the soup did. That night, lying on your straw mattress, you thought of the day's broth. Thin, bland, but shared among hundreds who all fought the same battle against hunger. There was strange comfort in that solidarity. In Victorian London, food wasn't just fuel, it was community, charity, and sometimes comedy. Even watery soup could nourish the soul, if not the stomach. By the late Victorian era, food in London was beginning to change. The hungry 1840s were a memory, and new laws, technology, and trade brought gradual improvements, even for the poor. The daily struggle for bread didn't vanish overnight, but the menu of possibilities grew richer. The Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875 cracked down on adulteration. Bread with chalk, milk with water, sweets with arsenic. At least in theory, these crimes became punishable. Did every baker suddenly behave? Of course not. But knowing inspectors might knock on the door made some of them think twice before seasoning bread with bone dust. The railways transformed markets. Fresh fish from the coast, vegetables from distant farms, and even fruit from abroad arrived in London within days. Oranges from Spain, bananas from Jamaica, and beef from Argentina began appearing in stalls. Poor families still struggled to afford them, but just seeing exotic fruit piled high was a reminder that the world was changing. Canning grew cheaper too. By the 1880s, even working-class families could occasionally buy tinned meat or fruit. One neighbor boasted proudly of serving canned peaches to her children. They ate them so fast, she joked, "Careful or you'll swallow the tin." Tea and sugar, once luxuries, had become daily staples. By century's end, even the poorest homes guarded a tea caddy like treasure. A weak brew with a spoonful of sugar was comfort in a cup, warming cold mornings and softening stale bread. "God bless tea," one washerwoman sighed. "Without it, I'd be dead or worse, married to a coffee drinker." The Sunday roast, too, became more common among workers. Industrial prosperity meant wages stretched further, and butcher shops learned to cater to modest budgets. Families bought smaller joints, cheaper cuts, or meat puddings bulked with suet and vegetables. Still, the tradition of gathering around a Sunday table gave the poor something in common with the rich, if not in quantity, at least in spirit. And yet, hunger never disappeared. For every family enjoying canned peaches, another scraped broth from bones. Food charities still served watery soup, and children still sang songs about bread too hard to chew. Humor remained the defense mechanism of the poor. "We eat 3 courses," one man said. "First is hunger, second is bread, third is regret." But if Victorian food teaches anything, it's resilience. People survived with imagination, turning bones into feasts, potatoes into goose, and scraps into puddings. They laughed at chalky bread, sang about weak milk, and found joy in half an orange shared on market day. Your own story ends where it began, in that tiny London room lying on a straw mattress. Only now, your belly feels fuller, your body stronger. You've tasted mock rabbit and real herring, plum cake crumbs and oranges from Spain, charity soup and festival feasts. You've walked through hunger and humor alike. As you drift towards sleep, you imagine the future. Refrigerators in every home, bread soft and pure, milk cold and safe, fruit from every corner of the globe. The Victorians could never have dreamed of supermarkets or takeout, yet they dreamed all the same, mock goose today, perhaps real goose tomorrow. And so you close your eyes with one last smile. Because if there's one lesson from Victorian food, it's this: nourishment is more than calories. It's memory, laughter, community, and hope. Even cabbage soup tastes better when shared. Even the poorest table can hold a feast if the heart is full. The city outside hums with carriages, vendors, and the endless rhythm of survival. Inside, your muscles relax, your breathing slows, and the day's flavors, sweet orange, warm bread, salty herring, become dreams. Sleep well. You've survived Victorian London's table, and you'll never look at your modern fridge the same way again.